I grew up in the village of Abaawa, a place where the air was always thick with the scent of palm oil, the rustling of the tall grass, and the constant hum of life. Our village was nestled between two hills where the elders said the spirits of our ancestors lived. We had everything we needed: food from the fertile soil, water from the stream, and the strength of community. But like any place, there were those who sought more, those who didn't understand the delicate balance between the living and the spirits. It was the beginning of the harvest season, and the village was preparing for the annual Ogun festival, a celebration of the god of iron and war. It was a time for us to give thanks for the crops, for our safety, and for the protection of our ancestors. Everyone was busy: women grinding millet, men sharpening tools, and children playing around the village square. But there was one person who wasn't participating in the preparations: Olu, the eldest son of the chief, Oluwasen. Olu was always a curious one, always asking questions, always looking beyond the village. He had been to the city and seen the wonders of the world, and he came back to the village with big ideas. But he also came back with a sense of superiority, as if the old ways of our people were outdated, as if the stories our elders told were mere superstition. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the village, I sat with my grandmother, Mami Enyola, near the fire. She was telling me one of her many stories of our ancestors and the gods. She spoke in a low voice, as if the spirits themselves were listening. "Adebayo, you must always listen to the drums. They speak to us, you know," she said, her wrinkled hands weaving a basket. I nodded, though I didn't fully understand. I had heard the stories, but I didn't know if they were real or just old tales meant to keep children in line. "The talking drum," she continued, "is a sacred thing. It speaks the language of the spirits. And when it speaks, we must listen, or there will be consequences." I didn't know it then, but that evening the drum would speak, and it would be Olu who would ignore it. The next day, as the festival drew near, I noticed Olu sitting outside his father's hut, staring at the ground. His face was troubled, his brow furrowed. I approached him, curious. "Olu, what's wrong?" I asked. He looked up, his eyes filled with doubt. "Adebayo, I'm tired of all this nonsense. Every year we gather for the festival, and every year we thank the gods for our crops and our health. But it's all just superstition. There's no proof that the gods help us. There's no proof that the spirits watch over us." I was shocked. This was Olu, the son of the chief, the one who was supposed to carry on the traditions of our people. "But the drum," "Olu," I said, "the drum speaks for the ancestors. It's not just a sound, it's a message." Olu laughed, but there was no joy in it. "I've heard it, Adebayo, but I don't believe it. It's just a man beating a drum, nothing more." I wanted to argue, to tell him that the drum was sacred, but I could see it was no use. Olu had already made up his mind. That night, as the village gathered for the first night of the festival, the elders prepared the sacred talking drum. It was made of the finest wood, with intricate carvings of animals and spirits etched into its surface. The drum was placed in the center of the village, and the chief's son, Oluwasen, began to beat it. The sound echoed through the village, deep and resonant, like the voice of the earth itself. But something was wrong. As the drum beat, a strange silence fell over the crowd. The usual rhythm was missing, and the air felt heavy. I looked around and saw the elders' faces filled with concern. Mami Enyola leaned in close to me, her voice barely a whisper. "The spirits are restless," she said. "The drum is trying to warn us." I looked at Olu, who was sitting on the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed. He didn't hear it. Or if he did, he didn't care. That night, as the festival continued, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. It was not the kind of storm we were used to, the kind that comes with the changing seasons. No, this was a violent storm, with winds that howled like angry spirits and rain that came in sheets, drenching everything in its path. The villagers scrambled to secure their homes, but I saw something that chilled me to the bone. Olu was standing by the edge of the river, staring into the storm as if daring it to come closer. "Olu, come back inside," I shouted, but he didn't listen. The wind picked up, and the river began to rise, flooding the banks. I ran to him, but before I could reach him, the ground beneath us shook, and a massive tree, one that had stood for generations, was uprooted by the storm's fury. It fell across the path, blocking the way back to the village. I turned to Olu, who was still standing there, his eyes wide with fear. "We have to go," I said, pulling him by the arm. But he wouldn't move. "Why is this happening?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What have we done to anger the gods?" I didn't answer him. There was no time. The storm was growing worse, and we had to get back to safety. As we ran, the wind howled louder and the rain came down harder. The villagers had gathered in the chief's hut, praying for protection. I could hear the elders chanting, their voices rising above the storm. But Olu was still in shock, his mind racing with doubt. "It's the drum," I said, grabbing his arm. "It's trying to warn us. The spirits are angry because we didn't listen." Finally, we made it back to the village, drenched and exhausted. The storm raged through the night, but by morning, it had passed. The sun rose, casting a golden light over the village, but the damage was clear. Several huts had been destroyed, and the crops were flooded. Olu sat outside his father's hut, his head in his hands. "I should have listened," he said, his voice breaking. "I should have believed." Oluwaseun, the chief, stood beside him, his face solemn. "The drum speaks, my son. It is not just a sound. It is the voice of our ancestors. When we ignore it, we invite chaos into our lives." That day, the villagers came together to rebuild. But for Olu, the lesson was clear. The spirits had spoken, and he had ignored them. And now, the village would have to suffer the consequences. In the quiet village of Umuokwe, where the sun rose lazily over lush green fields and palm trees swayed in the breeze, the season of Ikeji was approaching. This was a time of Thanksgiving, when families returned to their ancestral homes to honor the spirits of their forefathers, share in communal feasts, and celebrate the harvest. It was also the time when the roads to the village bustled with travelers returning home. Among those preparing for the journey was Obinna Ease, a trader in the bustling city of Onitsha. Every year, he and his family made the trip back to Umuokwe to celebrate Ikeji with his relatives. Obinna, a man of practicality and little patience for traditions, saw the journey more as a duty than a joy. His wife, Adaora, however, held the village and its customs close to her heart. She was the glue that kept the family tied to their roots. It was 2 days before the journey, and the household was alive with activity. Adaora packed clothes, cooked yam fries and chin-chin for the road, and ensured the children, Chika and Nkem, were ready. Obinna, on the other hand, was busy checking the car, a battered Toyota he had stubbornly refused to replace. "Obinna," Adaora called, her voice carrying the weight of concern. "Have you prayed about this journey?" Obinna laughed, waving her off. "Ada, must you bring God into everything? The car is fine, the roads are clear, and we've done this trip 100 times. What is there to pray about?" Adaora frowned but said nothing. She had grown used to her husband's dismissive attitude towards spiritual matters, but something about this trip felt different. That night, as Obinna snored beside her, she knelt by the bed and prayed, "Lord, protect my family. If there is danger ahead, show us mercy." The morning of the journey arrived, and the family loaded their bags into the car. The children were giddy with excitement, chattering about seeing their cousins and playing in the village stream. Adora, however, felt a knot of unease in her stomach. As they drove out of the city, the roads became quieter, flanked by tall trees and the occasional thatched roof hut. About an hour into the journey, they encountered an old woman standing by the roadside, her wrapper tied tightly around her waist and a small basket in her hand. She waved at them, signaling for help. "Should we stop?" Adora asked, her voice hesitant. "Why not?" Obinna replied, pulling over. The old woman approached, her face lined with age but her eyes sharp and penetrating. "Good morning, my children," she said. "I need a ride to the next village." Obinna helped her into the car, and they continued on their way. The old woman sat silently for a while, then spoke. "My son, you are heading to Umokwe, yes?" Obinna nodded. "Yes, Mama. We're going for the Ikeji festival." The old woman sighed deeply. "You must be careful. There is danger on the road ahead. Pray and seek protection before you continue." Obinna chuckled, shaking his head. "Mama, thank you for your concern, but we'll be fine. I've traveled this road many times." The old woman's gaze hardened. "I have said my piece. May the spirits guide you." When they reached her stop, she got out, her parting words echoing in Adaora's mind. "Pray before you continue." As they approached the forested stretch of the road, the car began to sputter. Obinna frowned, pulling over to check the engine. "What now?" he muttered, opening the bonnet. Adaora stepped out, her heart pounding. "Obinna, maybe we should pray." "Not this again, Ada," he snapped. "The car just needs a moment." But as he tinkered with the engine, a truck appeared in the distance, speeding toward them. Adaora grabbed the children and moved them to the side of the road. The truck swerved dangerously close, its horn blaring. As they approached the forested stretch of the road, the car began to sputter. Obinna frowned, pulling over to check the engine. "What now?"